From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
Welcome back to From the Void. We're back with part 2 of my conversation with author Scott Smith on his book about real Catholic exorcisms. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, pause, go back and listen to that first, and then come back to this episode. If you've already heard part 1, then welcome to part 2 of Real Exorcisms on From the Void. Unbelievable. So this poor girl is just retching nonstop, and as you said, what's the most mysterious piece about it is that she's not eating enough.
Yeah.
To give her sort of the ammunition to be able to do that. So that's bizarre enough as it is. And then of course you have the Spider-Woman moment, where she's leapt up into the ceiling and is clinging there. So like all these like horrifying moments, but ultimately, it does seem as if the exorcism is successful in the end.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about how like they were able to resolve that particular case.
Yeah. Father Theophilus in the exorcism, and if Father Carlos Martin is also the relic priest, so he does this a lot too. Father Theophilus had a relic of the true cross. Which there's still a good bit of that, good bit of those to be had, and exorcists kind of have, if you think about Neo when he's getting in the Matrix, right, and like all that armory comes at him, and he can just like pick and choose. I think about the exorcist priest being able to do that with relics, right? Because, and I think a relic of the true cross is always going to be effective in an exorcism, because that is the sign of their defeat, right? Oh, hell, where is thy sting? Oh, death. But also anytime you have a relic of the Blessed Mother, right, that's its own interesting story, because we don't, a first-class relic of a person is a piece of their bone or hair, fingernail clippings even. I think people look at Catholics like, what are y'all doing? Keeping all this stuff. But it's amazing how effective these things are. And we see biblical support for that. But you can't have a first-class relic of the Blessed Mother, because she was assumed into heaven bodily. And, maybe not all Christians believe that, but whether they believe it or not, there's no first-class relics of the Blessed Mother.
Right.
And the Blessed Mother, I'm kind of going a little off field, Emma Schmidt, it was the true cross, but the Blessed Mother, you'll see, and I've spoken to, authorities about this, that she appears at the end of at the turning point, at the final inflection point of most exorcisms. Not all, but most. And it's almost like when she comes in and the demon sees her, it's like the trap door to hell just opens up, and it's like Looney Tunes where they're just like hanging there for a second, and then poof, they plummet. What's interesting is there are some other denominations out there that are kind of anti-Mary, anti-Catholic, however you want to describe it. And they also note the appearance of the Blessed Mother in exorcisms at the turning point, but they describe her as the Queen of Heaven. And they say that she is the Queen of Demons, that she is herself a demon. And it's like what they said the same thing about Christ in the Gospels. They said, you are Beelzebub. You are casting out demons because you yourself are a demon. So I'll leave y'all to the conclusions on that. But it's amazing when you can find out the demon's antagonist in heaven. Father Martins talks about this. And if you can find a relic of that saint and press it to the possessed person's head, literally all hell breaks loose, right?
Yeah.
It's just fascinating. But Yeah, so Father Theophilus, I try not to cuss, but B.A., right? He's an awesome bad mamma jamma. And, it's just, he kind of ends kind of simply, depart ye, fiends of hell, begone Satan, the Lion of Judah reigns. Right? And if, the Lion of Judah, that's the ancient prophecy of the coming Messiah was the Lion of Judah. Right? But in Revelation 6, all in heaven and earth are unable to open the seventh seal, right? But lo, the Lion of Judah approaches. And big surprise, it's a lamb, all right? The Lion of Judah is a lamb standing as though slain. And that's one of the fascinating things is when they would prepare the lambs for Passover, St. Justin Martyr, one of the church fathers, writes about this, they would crucify the lambs. And there would be hundreds of thousands of lambs crucified in the temple, right? And men, every head of household would carry out a crucified lamb on a staff, right? The lamb would be crucified, wooden staves down its backbone and shoulders, carrying them back to their homes. And so that's the Lion of Judah conquers as a lamb.
Yeah, that's wild. One of the other ones that you talk about in the book is sort of the other major inspiration for the film The Exorcist.
Right, yeah.
And of course, the inspiration also for the novel that the film is based on by William Peter Blatty, and that is the 1949 case, so we'll move forward a couple decades, to the case of, and again, this is another pseudonym, Roland Doe. And so one of the things you mentioned earlier in this podcast, and you also mentioned in the book that I think is worth noting, is the fact that we're talking about the early 1970s here, and at this point, as you mentioned, Vatican II, and sort of like the societal changes in the way in which we view evil and the demonic, and as you said, viewing the devil as more metaphorical in the sense that evil can exist within all of us, and therefore we can carry the devil within all of us to some degree, until this book comes out, then ultimately when the film comes out, and that really serves as a renewal. I mean, the Catholic Church could not have had a better, piece of media to utilize. So talk about that case, and then ultimately the impact of that going into the sort of public consciousness.
Yeah, and I think it took a little while for the impact of it to really be felt. The church, I always kind of compare the Catholic Church to the Ents, from Lord of the Rings, right? The hobbits want to move so quickly, and the Entmoot, they get together and they're like, have you decided? Are you going to go to battle? It's like, no, we have just finished saying our names. It's been days. And that the church often is the ultimate conservative force because we are slow moving. We're glacial. And it immediately got the devil immediately returned to people's imaginations, which was good. Now, imagination to reality maybe took a little longer. But with this, so we call him Roland Doe, that, as a boy, that the primary inspiration for The Exorcist was a boy, not Linda Blair, not a girl, Reagan. And what's cool is that he's passed away, I think, maybe 10 years ago, something like that. But now we know his name now too. Instead of Roland, it was Ronald Hunkler, which kind of reminds me of the Onceler, from the Lorax.
Yeah.
But and so we know now, because we know who it was based on. We have some testimony from some of his schoolmates from that time. Not a lot, because he was born in 1935, and by the time we knew who he was, a lot of the other witnesses besides the primary sources, which is what I write from, the diaries of his exorcists were the main source of testimony. But now we do have some bits from kids that knew him. One of the really fascinating things, if we had known about this, it might have gotten into the movie, was Ronald, right? Roland, now we know him as Ronald, was sitting in his desk. Think about like the old wooden desks in school, with the desk attached to the seat, and he started vibrating like supernaturally vibrating, and the teacher got upset. Like, why are you doing this? You're just disrupting class. Like, the teacher was kind of oblivious to what was happening, but the student next to him saw, like, he was shaking as though like an earthquake was happening just for him. So I thought that was a really interesting little tidbit of testimony that we just now kind of got about him. But so what happened was, I think was it his grandmother who provided him with a Ouija board? And yeah, I mean, so there were some articles in the magazines in the 70s that kept the anonymity, but still told us, gave us some insights into Child's. The diary from Father Bishop, which is kind of an interesting combination. He's Father Bishop. He's not a bishop. He's just a father, but his last name is Bishop. January 15th, 1949. A dripping noise was heard in his grandmother's bedroom by the boy and his grandmother. A picture of Christ on the wall shook, and scratching noises were heard under the floorboards. Not good. No. From that night on, scratching was heard every night from 7 p.m. until midnight. This continued for 10 consecutive days. After 3 days of silence, the boy heard nighttime squeaking shoes on his bed that continued for 6 consecutive nights. And there's just there's a lot of really interesting descriptions of what the boy is experiencing that come from the records of the exorcists, the diaries. There was an Aunt Tilly. Roland/Ronald had an Aunt Tilly who had a deep interest in spiritualism and had introduced Roland to the Ouija board. She died at a young-ish age, 54, of MS, but Roland's mom believed that there was a connection there. Like, I don't know if we actually have it from Roland about the Ouija board, but that's what the parents suspected. Yeah.
There's some other things too that sort of begin to happen. But initially, what's interesting about this case is that initially they go to a Protestant minister who,
that's right,
who's sort of fascinated by it, but I think pretty early on realizes he's out of his depth, and then he actually refers them to a Catholic priest.
Yeah. And so in the movie, they're right next to Georgetown University, which is a Jesuit university, still is. And so the first priest that they encounter is just a diocesan priest, which can be, very holy men, very effective, but not necessarily trained as exorcists. And really, during the 70s and 80s, Jesuits were kind of leading the charge theologically against the reality of the devil. So this poor boy was not in the there was no Father Theophilus nearby for him, basically. But I mean, not to diminish the impact that he found some good Jesuits, basically, that were willing to exorcise him, and it continued all the way to St. Louis. It kind of began near D.C. in the Maryland area, and it continued. But yeah, so it began with Father Hughes, and then we eventually he also gets some psychological help, which psychologist was not effective in this situation, as you might expect. And then the second round of exorcisms begins, and like one of my favorite lines from the movie, I'm going to need an old priest and a young priest. Yeah. And that's what he had, yeah.
Yeah, in comes Father Raymond J. Bishop and Father William Sporing Bodern, who I think we get, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do get a lot of sort of commentary by a guy who joins them later, who was not a priest at the time, but would become a priest later, Father Walter Halloran. I think a lot of sort of the accounts that we know today are kind of come from him, if I remember correctly there. Yeah,
so Father Halloran, or to be Father Halloran, he was a Jesuit scholastic at the time. When they moved to St. Louis, so you've got St. Louis University and then Creighton University are both Jesuit universities. And so that's why they have this nexus of Jesuit priests. And I can talk with this with some knowledge because I used to be a Jesuit. I was a Jesuit novice, and then I left seminary, and now I have 6 children. But so what you do so Halloran was a scholastic. You start as a postulant, then a novice, scholastic, then a regent. So it's one of the stages. It actually takes about 14, 15 years to become a Jesuit priest. You become a priest, but then to become a full-fledged Jesuit priest, it takes a long time. And every Jesuit priest is going to have a doctorate in theology or some other kind of doctorate. So that's part of the reason it takes such a lot of education. But yeah, so that's why he had that's kind of the Jesuit background for Roland.
Yeah, and one of the other things I think is worth mentioning too that's kind of a strange and unusual occurrence during his particular exorcism are the writings that sort of manifest on his skin. Talk about that a little.
Yeah, and that actually appeared in the book, I think. It's been a while since I read the Exorcist book, but and like I say, I could be confused with some of the sequels, but that actually, I think, occurred. That was something they picked up, which is not something I've seen really in any other exorcism. So that's a unique element to Roland Doe. Another unique thing is that because they originally went to a non-Catholic pastor because they weren't Catholic, and when all this is said and done, they convert to Catholicism.
Probably the most Catholic of any of the Catholics currently, I would imagine. Yeah, that's not so. The one I kind of want to end on is another very famous case. So you have 3 of like the biggest ones that most people would probably know just by virtue of at least the movies made adaptations, and so. This was one that I saw the movie first and then didn't realize until after the fact it was actually based on a real case, was The Exorcism of Emily Rose, or in real life, the case of Anneliese, is it Michael or?
I say Anneliese Michel.
Okay.
But, she's German, Austrian, so I really don't know. I need to get that right.
Yeah. We'll go with whoever can tell us the correct pronunciation. You win a prize. But 1976. So this one's a little bit after the last couple, so another couple decades forward. And this one has kind of an interesting controversy that lingers over it that they mentioned in the movie as well. But in this one, does not have such a happy ending. The other 2. Both individuals obviously make it through the exorcism. It is, for all intents and purposes, successful. In this one, kind of a sad ending, and it also results in both the parents and the priest being accused of negligence. So talk about why this one's so unique compared to the other ones that we've covered so far.
Yeah, this one, God, there's just so many parts to this one that are fascinating. So Anneliese Michel, she was a particularly holy girl, right? She had received her sacraments. Like, she had the protection she needed. And as is shown in the dramatization, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, it appears that this was allowed to happen to her for the glory of God. In the movie, she was given a choice whether to have the torments continue and be free of this, or to continue to suffer. And as Catholics, we believe in redemptive suffering. Like, it's not like we're adding or taking away anything from what Christ suffered on the cross, but more our prayers, when fortified by fasting or suffering, they can be extremely effective for other people. Whether it's bringing them to Jesus or healing them, that's how we really. I say all the time, don't let good suffering go to waste. Right? It can be a reason and a purpose for all the hurt in our lives. We can do something with it, and ultimately, that's. And Elisa, because she's a really holy young person, she decided to continue with the torments. And I think there's and the gambit or the choice is given to her by the Blessed Mother. And so some people have even put forward her cause for canonization, or beatification and canonization, that because she died a martyr's death. But it's weird because you just don't see this kind of thing in exorcism. So it's a very unique kind of situation. And you can even see in the manner of her suffering and the manner of her torments, like the demons hated her for her piety. One of the things that will always stick with me when I was reading through this, and you don't have to just read through this, like the recordings of her exorcisms, many of them, because there's almost 100 sessions, are available. You can find them online. But the demons would make her genuflect up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, like rapidly, like in a supernaturally rapid way, to the extent that the ligaments in her knees eventually ruptured, and they had to hold her assistants had to hold her up on both arms. But part of the reason all this was made public is because it became the subject of a trial in Germany, that her parents were prosecuted by the German government for neglect, because ultimately Annalisa died of starvation because the demons would not let her eat. And Germany at that time, maybe now too, all this supernatural hogwash, they didn't believe any of it. So the only possible way somebody can die of starvation is if the parents are inflicting this on the child. And so the parents and the exorcists were criminally prosecuted and convicted. And so the recordings of her exorcisms, that's why they became a matter of public record, and that's why they're available even to this day. So there's a lot just there, I think. In which direction do you want to go on this one?
Yeah, that's what's most remarkable. I think it's harder. It's easier for people to kind of have that suspension of disbelief when we're talking about an exorcism that happened hundreds of years ago. Yeah. But when we have one that's a little bit closer to modern day, and there's recordings and there's pictures. I mean, I've seen pictures online of her, and it's hard to look at.
Yeah, she was this beautiful girl, And,
yeah, she was like very pretty, and by the end, it was just a shell of her former self.
Yeah.
Real quick though, before we get into it, for those who aren't familiar with the concept of genuflecting, again, getting down to the kneeling prayer position is what we're talking about there. But talk about so she starts to go to conventional doctors initially for treatment, and goes to multiple different doctors before they eventually consult the church and bring in Fathers Arnold Renz and Ernst Alt, who are assigned to help conduct the exorcism. So talk about the process that led her to eventually consulting the church for help.
Yeah, so trying to find the part before when the torments begin. One of the interesting things with her is that her family had just been on a pilgrimage to San Damiano, which you might think Damien like in the Omen or something, but this is the church that St. Francis was rebuilding, and so her life and connection with the rebuilding of the church is a significant connection. One of the things that's always striking to me is this girl that was so pious. Her behavior. She starts, barking like a dog. The stench just became overwhelming. And what you see with a lot of these, and what we kind of alluded to before, where the demons will know if something's blessed, but they'll also have repugnance to anything holy, and it kind of came on slowly, like an infection for Annalisa, but eventually, like the sight of the Eucharist was just she couldn't handle it. That ultimately is one of the things that would send her into a tailspin. So when all these things were happening, the diagnosis became relatively straightforward. Yeah.
Gosh, yeah, and obviously, once the Catholic priests come involved, one of the things that you mentioned that I think is so different about this case than the other ones. The other ones, within a couple sessions, generally speaking, problem solved, demons are gone.
Yeah.
In this case, not so much. They hung in there, and as you said, there were over 100 exorcisms performed over a period of quite a while.
So Fathers Rentz and Alt carried out the rite of exorcism 67 times over 10 months. It says 1 or 2 exorcism sessions a week. And each of those, that's where you could easily get into the hundreds, depending on how you divide this up. Each one of those sessions could last 4 hours. And all during this time, so me and my boys, we altar serve. And after Mass, we can be pretty full of sweat sometimes. Like, the liturgy is hard work. And it's only an hour. These priests are doing this for 4 hours. And you can imagine how exhausted they would be after. But God, it just breaks my heart how what would have Annalise started as a young person, but and a young person could withstand a lot of this, the beatings, the inflictions that the demons inflicted on her. But 4 hours of that, it's like, it makes you think of chemo sessions, when people are having to drink in this poison, and but like physical beatings. It's just, and with her, it's, you never want to trust in what a demon says, right? But the transcripts, there's a lot of interesting things said in the transcripts. Both Judas and Lucifer claim to be possessing Annalisa. Lucifer can possess. I don't see how Judas could. That doesn't seem to make sense since he's human. There's not like a process where you become a demon, right? Demons, angels, each one of them is its own species. There's no transspeciation when you die. So I don't know how all that would happen. Maybe the same demon that possessed Judas led him to hang himself after betraying Christ. Maybe that's what happened with Annalisa. I don't know. But some of the things they take credit for are eye-opening, but again, part of me wants to read too much into this. So the demons take credit for the Catholic practice. It became much more common post-Vatican II for us to receive Holy Communion on our hands. There's a movement, there's a movement in the church to return to a greater posture of reverence, that not to actually touch the Eucharist, that we receive on our knees, and as an image of the Passover lamb, we receive the Eucharist on our tongue. So we never even touch the out of reverence. And the demons actually claim that change was something they accomplished, that convincing us to take the Eucharist in our hands instead of kneeling and on the tongue. That was very interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can believe them, but it is very interesting.
You're like, out of all the things they could have taken credit for,
Yeah, but it's funny, maybe part of this is building on Annalisa's thoughts in some kind of way. Maybe that's something that was of interest to her. I don't know. But it's funny that if they're going to claim, they're not going to claim, hey, that car wreck, right? That airliner going down. No, they're going to claim what to them is most significant, right? The most devastating. So it makes you think,
Yeah, absolutely. Just lost my notes. One sec.
No problem.
Yeah, you mentioned that. You mentioned the recordings and the fact that those are fairly common. It is interesting because I think now with the advancement of technology, there are some accounts of exorcisms where I've read that. Look, for example, to go back to Dr. M. Scott Peck, anytime he was a part of an exorcism, not only were the parties involved, and maybe this is something that they learned from the Annalisa case, but they would sign waivers, and on top of that, they recorded it just for their own protection, as well as documentary purposes. So it is kind of interesting because it feels like that's probably more and more common with modern exorcism. So from that perspective, is that something that you've seen in more modern cases? And it sort of feels like the late 70s again, in terms of we're sort of seeing another move back towards more of a traditional, more of the traditional ways. And we're seeing, a lot of these movies crop up again and sort of renewed interest in this type of topic. So what's your sense of sort of where we are today with this particular topic?
I think, I can't wait for the day when there will be a audio recording of an exorcism, that it's a demonstration of the supernatural, right? Because we have a big problem of most of, I'd say, America, maybe not most of the world. I think the rest of the world might have more sense than we do. That in America, we think just what we can see and hear. We're very materialist, right? And I don't mean that in terms of Madonna Material Girl, just about clothes and cars and stuff, though that's a problem too. That we believe that only what we can see is real. Only what we can test in a petri dish and a test tube is real proof. And we have a hyper-empirical understanding of the world, very little supernatural or metaphysical understanding. And I cannot wait for there to be like a video of an exorcism that's just so obvious that I don't want people to start worshiping Satan, obviously, but I would like them to break out of this materialist delusion of reality. And it's just like, and people ask, well, why don't we just record this so we can show everybody the reality of what's going on here? Well, when we do, people believe that it's just faked, right? Like, it keeps happening. It happens again and again. Like, Our Lady of Fatima appears in Fatima, Portugal, and there's testimony of 40, 50,000 people that the sun danced in the sky. It zoomed to earth. They were all soaking wet because it had been raining, and then they're suddenly dry. That testimony, though, it's dismissed, right? Shroud of Turin, dismissed. Recordings of Annalisa Michel, dismissed. So, there's a very popular book out there right now, The Warning, that's talking about all these, I don't want to say prophets with a lowercase p, right? Not like Old Testament, like the age of prophecy, true prophecy is over, but you have all these mystics, Catholic and otherwise, that are each being told in their own way that there's a coming illumination of conscience. I don't know if you've heard about that, or it's a very interesting confluence of prophecies, and I just want us all, at least we can be speaking about reality with the same tongue again. It's like we don't even see the world. We don't even see the same realities anymore. So this might be not the answer to the question you're looking for, but the more data, videographic, photographic we get of these sorts of things happening, I hope it will convince people. But the more if you believe, with people have an incredible faith that only what they can see is real, and that faith is hard to break with evidence. Right? That faithful people presenting evidence, it's very everything's upside down and topsy-turvy these days.
Yeah, if we could just get to the point where people can acknowledge the fact that there are mysteries that still remain in the world that cannot be explained at least at this point by science, and that there's room out there for mystery to still exist, I think is a first step in the right direction.
And that makes life really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, a life where it's just Walmarts and Best Buys and big box stores and concrete parking lots is boring.
Could not agree more. Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming on today. This is fascinating. Definitely have to have you back on, talk about your new book. We can talk about some near-death experiences, but this is a lot of fun, and thank you so much again for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of From the Void. If you enjoyed this episode or any of the previous episodes, please consider rating, reviewing, subscribing, and sharing with a friend. We'll be back next week with a brand new mystery. So until then, you've been listening to From the Void.